Welcome to this corporate reporting class. My name's Kieran Doe. I'm a senior tutor at ACA Masters and multiple ICAEW prize winner. In this class, I'll be offering my advice on what you should do to prepare for your CR exam and what to ensure that you do in your CR exam. So firstly, advice on what you should do to prepare for your CR exam. I suggest that you break it down into examinable areas and topics. There's a huge amount of content for the CR exam, but if you break it down into smaller topics and question types, you'll make your preparation much more manageable. So to get an idea of how you could break CR down, if you take a look at our video course structure, you can see that the way that we break CR down is by the question types. So FR questions and audit risks and procedures questions are the most common type of question. But of course, there is also data analytics software, i.e. inflow questions, as well as other types of audit question as well. And then there's also financial statement analysis and ethics. So these are the type of questions in the CR exam. So you could structure your preparation like this and then subdivide it or break it down further by topic. So the key financial reporting areas are assets, revenue, provisions, financial instruments, hedging, leases, tax, etc. Of course, groups as well being another key one. So by breaking it down like this, you can make CR much more manageable. And what you can then do for each topic is make sure that you've understood the key technical content. So for example, with assets, you can make sure that you've understood the key technical content. So for example, like initial recognition, measurement, so initial recognition and subsequent measurement, the different models, cost versus revaluation model, then come on further into an asset's life and it might become impaired, could then be held for sale, etc. So making sure that you understood all of that key technical content, but most importantly, then going away and practicing questions on it. So understand that technical content, but then immediately after, go and practice some exam questions on that topic so that you can apply that content in an exam scenario and work on your exam technique so that you're applying that content and testing yourself on that content actively in the exact scenario that you are going to be examined on. And then you can just go through each of the topics, like this. You can then move on and go to revenue. Again, make sure you understand the key technical content, but then immediately after, go and practice exam questions on revenue, exam questions which have tested revenue, both FR, but also audit as well. So then once you've identified how you're going to break CR down, you can build a study plan to ensure that you cover each of the topics. Like we've said, you can break the FR and audit risks and procedures down by topic like this, and then also data analytics software questions, other audit types of questions, financial statement analysis, and ethics. So once you've decided how you're going to break CR down, you can build a study plan. So you've got a clear plan of action of how you're going to tackle and when you're going to master each topic. So for example, if you are working, 9 to 5 and you get like a lunch break, obviously this would vary massively by individual, but assuming, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday with an hour for lunch, you can start to see when your availability for study is and how long you have in each session. So one way that I would look to build a study plan is that I would have the list of topics that I want to cover and I would start mapping them in to my free slots. So the first thing I would do is put in all my non-negotiable commitment. So for example, like work and any other commitments that you have. I would then put in some leisure time. So me personally, I like to go to the gym and exercise regularly. I feel like that does complement studying quite well, because obviously it keeps your brain and body kind of active and alert and feeling healthy. So now put in some leisure time as well, and then you can kind of see where your free slots are to study. So there's several advantages of doing this. One of which is that you start to see that actually you might have small little times, perhaps before work or at lunchtime, and time after work as well. But actually, if you've broken it down into small topics like this, you can actually make effective use of these small little times. So a little bit of time at lunchtime, you might be able to practice a question or like watch a video during that time. And you can also see where your bigger study slots are. So if you're working Monday to Friday, obviously most of your time would be on the weekend. So you can allocate the bigger, chunkier, more difficult, more technically difficult topics to that time. So thinking of, financial instruments, tax, groups, etc. You could allocate those there. Whereas the topics which are where there's a lot of brought forward content from FAR, you might want to kind of allocate those to smaller slots, because you'll just be revising quite a lot of FAR content there. So you could, for example, watch an FAR video, before work or on your way to work, and then, the following lunchtime, practice some questions. For example, perhaps in the evening, practice some questions. So you can see if you're kind of breaking it down into smaller topics, you can then make use of these smaller little study slots that you have available. Now, in my experience and me personally, I find that little and often and starting early works best, rather than not doing anything in the week and then trying to do lots at the weekend, or perhaps even worse, not starting preparation until a few weeks before the exam. The earlier you start, the more time you have to cover all of these topics and to ensure that you cover them in sufficient depth. So I always encourage students to start as early as possible for those reasons. And when you're building your study plan as well, you can appreciate the overlaps between CR and SBM. Because of course, a common question in the SBM exam is to explain the FR treatment of a transaction or an issue or proposed transaction, whatever it may be. But those questions feel very similar to a CR, explain the FR treatment style question. So you might actually want to stack some SBM revision on these key topics, assets, hedging, financial instruments, on top of your CR revision as well. So maybe you've done some CR questions here, maybe the next day you'll do a couple of SBM questions. So you're attacking SBM at the same time. Another area where this works is financial statement analysis. So financial statement analysis, from the point of view of management, the directors analyzing the performance of the company, comes up in CR, but it also comes up in SBM as well. So you could kind of stack those two question types together as well, and really kind of benefit from the overlap there, really leveraging when you're focusing on that topic. So you can build your study plan out from today up until the exam. So of course, so many different ways you can do this, many more high-tech ways you can do this here, but this is just to kind of demonstrate the general principles of how you might build a study plan. And then just remember, a few weeks before the exam, you'll need to start attempting full exam papers. So it's good to start off in a manageable way by breaking it down like this and just focusing on individual topics. But once you've covered them all, then you should start attempting full exams. So the recent exams from the most recent year are good to attempt, and also the mock exams as well. And then just make sure that you mark your answer to identify the areas where you need to improve, so you can go in and target your next revision session on those areas where you didn't do so well. So for example, you do a full exam, and you lost quite a few marks on the FR question because you weren't particularly strong on groups, or you lost a lot of marks on the groups question, then of course you can go away and go back to your notes and the ICAEW workbook, make sure you get back up to speed on those groups technical aspects, and then you can just go to like the master plan section on groups and then practice several questions on groups one after the other. So that will kind of help you identify your weakness areas, and then do another mock exam and then see where your weakness area was there. So that's how I would suggest preparing for the CR exam. So in the build up to the CR exam, I would suggest breaking it down into smaller areas. For each area, understand the technical content, but also practice lots of questions so you can work on your exam technique at the same time and master CR one topic at a time. So you should kind of build this out into some sort of a plan. Personally, I find doing that at the start is almost quite reassuring. If you look at all of the topics for the CR, it can feel quite overwhelming. There's so much to cover. The workbook is exceptionally long. Whereas actually, if you kind of sit down, do a plan of what you're going to do for the next 10, 12, 16, possibly even like 20 weeks. Once you've put that plan together, it's kind of reassuring because you can think, well, yes, I know I'm going to cover everything. And as you kind of go through the weeks and crossing things off, that can be quite motivating as well. And then just allow some time for practicing full exam questions. So by doing it like this, you'll tackle CR one topic at a time. You'll break down this beast into smaller chunks, and you'll be mastering it one topic at a time. So then on exam day, and this equally applies when you're practicing questions. I think whenever you're practicing questions, you should think this is like the real exam. You want to be creating that realistic exam experience as much as possible. I suggest doing your questions in the software as well, so you can make it as realistic as possible, because that's what you're training for. You're preparing yourself and training yourself for this event. So therefore, you want to get your question practice as realistic as possible. And that's why I suggest doing questions as soon as possible, because that's what you're preparing for, to answer exam questions. So you really want to be doing those exam standard questions as soon as possible. So you start to see the way the examiners structure the questions, the types of things they include, the exam technique you should use for each type of question. So this advice applies when you're in the exam, but it also applies to your preparation as well, because they are essentially the same thing. So make sure that you allocate your time. So there'll be several requirements in each CR exam. So here we've got an FR requirement, which is worth 30 marks. And you can see you've got several things that you need to do. So you've got, explain the FR treatment, you need to redraft the financial statements, and then you've got a separate question on financial statement analysis. So make sure that you allocate your time to each part of the question. So first of all, allocate the marks, and you can calculate how much time you have for each question. It's really important that you attempt each part of every question. And whilst there isn't like a passing requirement, it's not as though if you don't attempt every question, you'll fail. The reason for this is that there are easy marks on every question. So therefore, if you attempt every question and get the easy marks on each, that's better than only attempting half of the questions and getting the easy and the medium marks on each of them. So you're really trying to strategize in terms of how you're going to approach the exam, and you want to grab all of the low-hanging fruit. You want to get all the easy marks and the medium marks across the paper. That's the easiest path to getting a passing mark, rather than only answering 2/3 of the paper and trying to get all of the hard marks. So you want to kind of have a strategy of how you're going to rack up your 50 marks as quickly as possible and as easily as possible, and increase the likelihood of you being able to do that. So make sure you attempt every question and every sub-requirement so that you can get the easy marks on each. And even in each individual requirement and in each individual issue, there will be easy marks in there as well. So it's important that you kind of start with the basics and then like apply it to the scenario. So to kind of give you an example, during a video course I work through lots of questions, and our materials have one of my model answers in here. So this is kind of an answer in full to the July 2021 exam. But to give you an example of what I mean, for example, in like issue 2, identifying the relevant part of the standard should be a relatively easy mark to get, because you've obviously got your notes to help you as well. And then apply it to the scenario, and calculate the numbers. If you kind of do it like that, then you'll be able to pick up the easy marks for getting some of the basics right, identifying the relevant part of the standard and applying it to the scenario. Whereas there might be some really difficult marks in there. It might have been really difficult to identify that some of the revenue should be deferred, or perhaps some of the numbers were really difficult. But actually, if you've kind of got these easy bits here, you've racked up quite a good few marks here on this part of the question. Struggled with this bit, maybe couldn't do it, moved on, got some marks for the easy audit risk, but then managed to get on through all of the issues and pick up like the easy marks on each section, but didn't get some of the hard marks. That would be fine to do in the exam. So you can kind of see here, start with the basics, get the easy marks, cover every issue. And bear in mind as well, you don't need to get every issue even to get full marks. You don't need to get all of the points to get full marks, because there's headroom marks. So if this question is 30 marks, there'll be some headroom marks in there. So it might be worth, for example, 35, 40, possibly even almost as high as 45. So the max you can get is 30. So if you get every point, once you go beyond 30, you're not actually scoring any marks. And actually, you could argue that's bad exam technique, because you're writing a point which doesn't get a mark. So even though it's correct, it's basically the same as writing an incorrect point, because you're not getting any credit for it. But that would, of course, be a very nice situation to be in if you're writing and you've already maxed out the marks on a question. But it just kind of gives you some insight and something to think about in terms of your exam strategy and your technique there. So those headroom marks, it really does mean you don't need to get everything correct. So getting just the easy and the medium marks will get you to a very good mark in this difficult exam. So as I've said, try to cover all of the different issues. So think of breadth rather than depth. You can kind of see here, short, concise, range of points, relevant part of the standard, apply it to the scenario, making sure I get onto the numbers. If the question's asked for journals, which it presumably did, then making sure I get those down as well, but making sure I answer every part of the question. So not spending lots of time on the FR treatment and not having time for the audit risks, and making sure that I've covered both the FR treatment and the audit risk and put down the journals that they have asked for in the question. So you can see short, concise, range of points is very much the exam technique I've used here. And yes, I know the questions in the back of the question bank are very long and detailed, but that's not what you're expected to produce. Now, I'm not saying that that's not useful to read. It absolutely is, because it's a comprehensive technical explanation. So it's a really good learning resource for that kind of question, that topic area. But you are absolutely not expected to produce that level of detail in the exam. It's just not possible. You cannot write and produce that amount in the exam. And some of the detail as well, particularly around some of the technical areas, is beyond what you'd be expected to produce. Some of them, I think they've got kind of the subsections of the IFRS standard, which you're certainly not expected to produce in the exam. So this is very much the exam technique you should be using. And as well, make sure that you kind of identify, when looking at the requirement, can you answer several parts of the question, at the same time? So this question, for example, which is actually the free sample class, you can see me work through this question in the free sample class, which is available on the CR page of the ACA Masters website. You can see me work through this. I'll demonstrate how to do this. But you can see you've got the 4 issues here. We need to explain the FR treatment, but we also need to redraft the financial statements. So it makes sense that as we go through and explain the FR treatment for the bond, relevant part of the standard, obviously IFRS 9, apply it to the scenario, calculate the numbers and the journals if we need to, but then immediately after, overlay those numbers to the draft financial statement. So have an adjustment column, first adjustment column, and overlay those to the draft financial statement. So that's a good example of answering multiple parts of the question at the same time. And as I said, you can watch me answer this question in the free sample class. This is another good example as well. I've obviously taken each issue one by one, so issue one, but I haven't just done the FR treatment. I've done the FR treatment and the audit risks and obviously the journals that they asked for as well. So answering several parts of the question, several tasks, several requirements at the same time, the FR and the audit. And I demonstrate this for lots of questions in the video course. And you can see me do this, as I've said, in that free sample class. And that will save you time in the exam. So you're not chopping and changing between the different issues. And it will also increase your marks as well, because when you're focusing on that issue and you thought, what's the FR treatment, it's then easier to think about what the audit risks are. If you said how this should be accounted for, and then you can think about what it is that the client may have done wrong, and therefore whether that be an overstatement or an understatement, which areas of the financial statements will be misstated. Therefore, your exam technique is absolutely crucial. All of this, getting the marks on every question, your writing style to use, and also how you use your notes in the exam as well. Everybody thinks, oh, great, it's an open book exam. That makes it easier. In fact, you can almost make it harder because there's a real risk of this being a time trap, and you think you're going to spend lots of time looking things up, but you don't have the time. There's a huge amount to get through. The scenarios are long. There's a lot of requirements. You really don't have much time at all. So you need to use your notes sparingly in the exam. Personally, I would use them for niche technical areas and for a reminder of exam techniques for certain types of question. So to give you an example of a few niche areas, and I point these out during the course. For example, share-based payments with a choice of settlement. That is very technical. How to do it, how to split the amount between the liability and equity. For example, maybe a sale and lease back would be like another example there. We've got kind of a simple calculation of how to do that, but how to calculate the right of use asset, etc. That would be another example. Maybe some areas around groups, particularly step acquisitions and step disposals, or maybe like a foreign subsidiary as well, or hedge accounting. Again, all examples of technical areas that you might look up. Definitely step acquisitions and step disposals might be something that you want to look up in the exam. So plenty of examples there. In terms of exam technique reminders, so at the end of each section, we've got like exam technique reminders, depending on the type of the question, but how to kind of explain the FR treatment, relevant parts of the scenario, apply it to the scenario, relevant parts of the standard, apply it to the scenario, calculate the numbers in a journal if you're required to, identify audit risks, but just a bit of a reminder here on how to structure your audit risks and then audit procedures, how to structure those. But maybe if you were required to identify weaknesses in the audit procedures, it can be useful to think about which assertions haven't been tested. So you might want to have those there as well. So this is useful for your typical FR and audit risk and procedures type questions, or maybe with financial statement analysis, the exam technique to use there. So you could say, has revenue gone up or down, trying to get a reason from the exam paper, and then provide some further analysis of the numbers and the types of points you would possibly consider including. So that's just a few examples there of where you might use a note. So for niche technical areas, I mean, the exam technique reminders, to be honest with you, once you've practiced enough questions, you should really know this. This should really be second nature. Personally, I've done enough questions where I don't need to look that up. That's probably more useful in your preparation when you're developing your exam technique. But when you go into the exam, you should really have your exam technique kind of nailed, ready, and to hand. So you can kind of see how these kind of go hand in hand, really. This is what you're doing in terms of your preparation, how you're breaking CR down, how you are just taking it one topic at a time, understanding the technical content, and then practicing questions, build out a plan of exactly how you are going to do that to make this exam more manageable. But when you're practicing questions and when you're in the exam, making sure that you've got a really good exam strategy and you're kind of quite savvy, really. So making sure that you are attempting every question, that you're getting the easier marks on every question. I've been through all the past CR exams. I've done all the past CR exams. I can assure you that there are enough easy and medium marks to get you through every exam, probably well into the 70s, to be honest with you. I mean, none of the points are really too obscure that they're absolutely impossible to get. But there certainly are some points which are hard and most students would not necessarily get, but there always are enough easy and medium marks. And common cause of failure is students not attempting every question. If you miss out a whole question or you miss out a substantial part of a question, you're just giving up so many marks, and there'll be so many easy marks in there. And if you've instead spent that time trying to get really difficult marks or perfect an earlier question, then that is bad use of time. And similarly, cover all the issues. That's the same really as, attempt every question. And in the videos, you'll see me working through lots of questions so you can see the exam technique to use. So you need to develop that exam technique to make sure that you've got that at your disposal in the exam. And again, that is again being kind of quite savvy. How do you get the marks as quickly and as easily as possible, and therefore in as least time as possible, so you can cover all of the issues and get the marks on every issue. So your writing style is really important, how you interpret the requirements, how you allocate your time, how you subdivide the information, how you decide which piece of information is going to be useful for each question, how you use a scenario in your answer, are all part of that exam technique that will enable you to produce these short, concise, targeted answers and deliver exactly what the examiner is looking for in as little time as possible, so that you can cover everything and attempt everything and rack up the marks. And then, of course, it's an open book exam, so this, if used correctly, is a blessing, but you do really need to have a really concise set of notes which cover the technical content really short and concise. You can quickly look this up in the exam. You don't have long in the exam to spend kind of looking things up, so you want something which is short and concise, which just summarizes the main point. You've already understood the technical content in your preparation, so you just need reminders of the key points, specific technical areas, how each element of the financial statements is accounted for, reminders of some audit risks and procedures, but you're really trying to use a scenario, of course, as much as possible. So, using your notes probably more for those niche areas, as I've said, step acquisitions, maybe some areas of deferred tax, sale and leaseback, financial instruments, modification of financial liabilities, where there's specific tests and specific rules. That is where I personally would be using the notes for. Because, of course, if you're spending time looking something up in the notes, that's time you're not spending typing a mark scoring point. So I've mentioned a few other resources that we have available. So we've got my CR video course, which explains the key technical content for each topic. So with the assets class, I explain the key technical content that includes FAR revision, and then immediately after I'll work through some exam questions so that you can see the exam technique to use, as I've just been discussing there. And then after the class, you can just go away and practice other questions which have examined that topic. So as I said, there's a free sample class, so you can see how this works. This is definitely useful to watch. This is a free sample class there on financial instruments, where I actually work through part of this question. So you can see that in that class, and you can see, as I've said, the exam technique to use, how I leverage and do several parts of the question at the same time, how I use the notes, etc. So that's really useful to view there. Then we've also got our CR materials, as you've seen me referring to here. So as I've said, these break it down by topic. For each topic, they summarize the key technical content. So you've got this to look up in the exam. So you've got all of the key content ready to look up, and you can use it quickly because they are nice and concise. And then at the end of each section, there is the master plan, which lists all the questions on that topic. So after the financial instruments section, there's a list of all of the recent questions which have examined financial instruments. And all these questions in bold are the ones which are covered during the video course. So these notes, as well as being designed for you to use in the exam, also allow you to use this kind of preparation approach of breaking it down by a topic. You can go to the financial instrument section, make sure you've understood that key technical content, and then go and practice some questions on that. And of course, during the video course, I would have explained that key technical content in an easy to understand way and worked through some questions on it as well. So closer to the exam, we'll release our advanced information analysis, obviously several weeks after the ICAEW have released the document that identifies the key financial reporting and auditing issues that are coming from the advanced information to get you well prepared for that question. So there are 3 samples on the corporate reporting page of the ACA Masters website. So 3 samples for the video course, the materials, and also the AI analysis. There's recent student feedback as well, so you can see how these resources have helped lots of other students. Many say that they find this exam-focused approach, this focus on exam technique, has really helped them boost their marks, that the AI analysis helped them prepare and guide them through the exam questions. You've had lots of mark improvements as well. And of course, you can go and watch a sample class yourself. Please also feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. There's my personal page. There's also the ACA Masters company page as well. I regularly post exam tips and advice on there, so it would be nice to connect with you. On the blog page of the ACA Masters website, there's also a blog article for CR. So there's also one about how to get the easy marks as well, quite useful, what I've just explained there about that. And then there's also one for CR as well, so another useful resource. And we also post videos on the ACA Masters YouTube channel. So hopefully that's given you some guidance on how to prepare for CR. I hope you found it useful. And as I've said, there's those other resources available to you as well. So very much looking forward to helping you get through your CR exam with top marks.